and overcome like a professional pilot. Um, my name is Toby Rice. I'm an ATP master flight instructor, FAA safety team representative. You got some stats on my flight time and stuff there. A bunch of instruction given, a bunch of airplanes flown. Fly rotorcraft, gyroplanes, as well as fixed wings airplanes, float planes. Also a captain. I locally fly a bunch of different Citation 500 series, like the 1, the 5, Ultra Encore, those all out of Nashville. I'm located in Dixon, Tennessee, which is an hour outside of Nashville, and I do have some contact information on the screen right here. For those of you who want to take that down now, I'm also going to have it at the end of the presentation as well. What I do is I'm a full-time professional flight instructor, and I specialize in training owner pilots. I do some mentor pilot work in the Citation 500 series, but not near as much as I do IFR mastery training and instrument ratings for owner pilots. Typically, the way we do that is we'll do the instrument training on a home flight simulator first, remotely, and then once the training's completed, then we go out to the airplane and do the entire syllabus in airplane. That way, your training in the airplane's more meaningful because you got through all the nitty-gritty, you know, box checking type stuff on the simulator first. But again, there's my contact information right there. You can say that for later. Moving on, you were all good pilots. Every last one of you is a good pilot. And you're here, open to learning, seeking to improve yourself as an aviator, and I respect you for being here. Most pilots, including many of my longtime clients, do not participate in webinars like this or safety seminars, and unfortunately, they need to hear these lessons the most. So thank you for attending and being a good pilot. Now let's work together and see if we can make you great and masters, right? Which of course is all about the journey, not about the destination. Let's see if I can get my computer to work here. Hold on. Not to click. There we go. So the objective of today, excuse me, I'm getting over a cough from the flu. It's going around. But the objective for today is I want you to know that the next time you put your family in the back of your airplane, instead of feeling anxiety, worry, or uncertainty, you're going to feel clarity, competence, and confidence, knowing that even when stuff hits the fan, you've got this and that there's no one else you'd rather have at the controls of your airplane to keep your family safe when stuff gets real. Um, I want you to consistently extract maximum opportunity out of your airplane, saying go more and no go less, but without adding unnecessary risk to your mission. That's something people oftentimes miss is that us humans, we tend to be risk averse. We tend to try to avoid the bad things more than we go for the good things. I want you to avoid all the bad things while also taking opportunity to do the good things, like fly, right? What's the point of flying if you can't fly, or because you're too scared to? I want to help you get that figured out. And then I want to remove any imposter syndrome that you have about thinking maybe you're not good enough to be a pilot or you're not worthy of your certificate or whatever by giving you some tools, some ideas, and some frameworks to become the kind of master pilot you've always wanted to be. That's kind of the objective for this presentation. Now, disclaimer, it'd be impossible for me to discuss every single idea, principle, or method associated with thinking and flying like a pro pilot. So instead of me giving you all the answers and telling you what to think, I'm going to try to show you when and how to ask the right questions, where to look for the right answers, and how to recognize those right answers when they appear, and then how to apply all that to your mission in a meaningful way. By helping you learn to see things through my eyes and look through my lens and think with my brain in a way, I hope to unlock this maybe an accelerated path to your personal mastery as a pilot. So I'm going to be sharing a mix of practical tips and ideas that have helped me as a pilot and instructor. Excuse me. So kind of the schedule for this session is first, we're going to go into a bit of philosophy and a bit of ideas on how to think versus what to think like a professional pilot. And then we're going to go into a bit of how to plan. This can be very tactical. So if you have ForeFlight, you're going to want to open that when it comes time for that. We're going to have a ForeFlight lesson. And then we're going to go into kind of how to execute that plan, some ways to make that happen, how to overcome unexpected changes. And then lastly is how to train in a way like a professional pilot. So first, what is a professional pilot? Literally, it's someone who gets paid to fly. But we know that not everyone who gets paid to fly is very professional. I mean, how many guys do you know that have commercial pilot certificates or ATP certificates and probably shouldn't be anywhere near an airplane? I know plenty of them, right? Um, Getting paid to fly does not mean that you're very good. Mastery is the goal, even if you never get paid to fly. So we're going to kind of merge the concept of professional pilot with master pilot, someone who is in that constant pursuit of mastery of their art, of the craft. Mastery is not the destination, it's the journey, and it's that continual pursuit of excellence. Now, there's this book that I have pictured here. I highly recommend everybody get this book. It's an older book. I think you can find it on Amazon. It's called Positive Flying, but I really like the tagline of this. It's the disciplined art of making the airplane do precisely what you want it to do. That's kind of, excuse me, I'm so sorry. That's kind of part of the goal for today. And it all starts right here in the old noggin, in the old head, in the old brain. So let's talk about how to think versus what to think. I'm going to grab a sip of this water real quick and let's get right into it. So, how many times did you just accept something, some bit of information because your CFI told you? And how many times have you given the reason on your check ride? That's what my DP or that's what my CFI said. Well, in my experience, that never goes well with the DPE. Ask me how I know how, right? Remember when you passed your private pilot check ride and you're holding your shiny certificate in your hand only to feel like an imposter, like you did all this stuff, but don't actually, it doesn't quite feel real yet. You felt like you have no idea what you're doing. You passed your check ride, but felt kind of empty. And a lot of people, and I know, have felt totally unprepared to take their family flying after passing their check ride. And if you did take your family flying, you and I both know you probably felt pretty nervous the whole time and feeling uncertainty that you couldn't shake. You figured you just needed more training, but the same old maneuvers with your CFI didn't help you. You still felt and likely still feel like you must not have what it takes to be a competent, confident, capable pilot. It feels like the training isn't working. This is something that a lot of my clients have told me in the past. And you'd be right, the training isn't working because the training is the problem. The training that you got to get to the point where you're at now is the problem, not the solution. And the definition of insanity, you might see where I'm going with this here. The definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again while expecting a different result. So therefore, doing the same ACS, check the box style training, but expecting to be a better than a C average pilot is insanity. And remember, the ACS and pretty much all FAA testing is based on a passing score of 70%. Um, if you pass with a 70, you get your certificate. Well, that's a grade of a C, right? So if you want to be anything more than a C average pilot, then you need to train much farther beyond the airman certification standards, which are good standards, but it's still a C average pilot. A big part of the problem is that you were only taught what to think to pass your check ride. Now, I understand not everybody has experienced this, but most people have. So I'm going to go ahead and make it this, it's kind of the rule is you're pretty much taught what to think, what to say to pass your check ride. A lot of flight instructors, I don't like it when they do this, but a lot of flight instructors give their students these gouges, these notes of exactly what the DPEs have been saying on these check rides because their students go and they take notes on the check rides. They come back to their instructor and say, "Hey, here's what he asked me." I think that's a big problem. Now, sometimes that can be helpful, but still, I think it's a big problem. You're just taught what to think. What are the right words to say to pass a check ride, not how to think for yourself in the real world. You end up becoming reliant instead of reliable. I thought that was a really powerful statement. You become a reliant instead of reliable. Master pilots do not accept mediocrity, especially in ourselves. We refuse to be the weakest link in the system. We expect ourselves to always be in control, even when crap hits the fan. Unfortunately, the system is currently rigged against us. Pilot schools are designed to pump out these guys for check rides to get to the airlines, but not really take the time to make great aviators. We've been taught what to think, not how to think. Excuse me. How to say all the lingo for the check ride, but maybe no real understanding. And more importantly, no real conviction. I'll explain some of that in a minute. We do things blindly with no understanding of why, accepting everything that we are taught as gospel, and then assuming that the ACS standard is the holy grail without ever learning how to think critically outside of a few DPE can scenarios. And I understand DPEs are supposed to be doing, more scenario based on their check rides, and they typically do, but still, at some point, you're going to have the same scenario pop back up, and it's going to go to the next student, and I mean, let's just be honest. That's how it works most of the time. Most new pilots pass their check ride with only 8 hours of cross-country time, nearly all of which is maybe to the same couple of airports within, 50 miles or so of their home. And maybe they make it maybe they go to all three airports and make the 150-mile triangle they have to do, but still, they get very little real-world meaningful experience. And needless to say, most pilots come out of the gate with a disadvantage. The bad habits and ignorant assumptions created by flight schools have crippled our ability to plan effectively, execute intentionally, and overcome real obstacles in the mission. And so sorry. Even something good like personal minimums has been misused and misconstrued into being something that it isn't. Most new pilots and CFIs vaguely use them as decision-making crutches to say no go when some simple risk mitigation would have easily allowed the flight to continue safely. That's almost exactly what that guy in the pre-webinar video was saying is how to make unacceptable risks acceptable or more acceptable. That's something that we don't often do. A lot of people just say on their check ride when the DPE asks, "Hey, the weather's a little bit lower than perfect. Are you going to fly?" Well, a lot of people will just say, "No, I'm not going to fly," because they want to be conservative. They want to make the DPE think that they're smart. They're a good pilot. They said no. Really, they're just lazy, and they need to learn how the weather works. But I'm pretty opinionated about that kind of stuff. Improper understanding of these tools is causing pilots to say go when they should not go, and also sometimes stay when they should go. So it's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. We all get that. But if you could say go more, if you could say go more and you could say no go less and take more opportunities to fly without putting yourself at risk, you would, right? I mean, who wouldn't? Excuse me. Wouldn't it be nice to think freely and think clearly about your flying, just like a seasoned airline captain or master flight instructor? Wouldn't it be wonderful to open your foreflight and understand what you're looking at and make a decision to stay or to go and be totally happy with that decision? Like you did the right thing. You didn't just, say no or say go because, your CFI told you to. This and more is possible when you begin to train your flying brain, as I call it, away from what to think and which is often taught in initial flight training, and move more towards how to think, which can be taught in meaningful ways by master instructors and experience wise aviation gurus. Now, I want to say something that I did not put in the presentation just now that was mentioned in the questions I noticed earlier. Excuse me, I need a sip of water. And that is that rote memorization. So there's 5 levels of learning in the FAA Aviation Instructor's Handbook that we're taught as instructors. There's rote memorization, then there's application, then there's I'm sorry, a rote memorization, understanding, then application, correlation, and then synthesis. We typically just leave it at correlation, though. The idea is you memorize just rote memorization, things like V speeds. Like there's VX is best angle of climb, VY is best rate of climb, that kind of thing. Then you get into understanding, which is I'm kind of, well, what does that mean, right? Well, Vx is the best angle. It's the most altitude per shortest unit of distance. And then Vy is most altitude over shortest unit of time, right? Well, okay, I understand what that does. It helps you get over obstacles or whatever for Vx. It helps you get the most altitude for Vy. And then an application would be the actual act of doing that in the airplane, pitching the airplane to 60 knots or 76 knots or whatever Vx and Vy is to, you know, get away from the planet. And then correlation is going out in the real world and finding and putting yourself in a situation or finding yourself in a situation where you need to use Vx or Vy. So these levels kind of make sense, but the problem is that a lot of people are heavily taught on the rote side of things, which is important. It is important to have certain things memorized, like memory items, but they're often just taught just enough of that to pass a check ride, not enough meaningful correlation to be able to go out in the real world and when stuff really happens in the wild, deal with it. So that's some food for thought. I can't provide an exhaustive list of all the things that you must learn and how to think. But I'm going to try to give you a handful of concepts that might help prime your brain for the remainder of this workshop, as well as your flying in general. So, how to think versus what to think. Master pilots, these are people that we want to become, right? We think and operate in terms of known quantities. And maybe that's not the right term, but it's what I came up with, at 10 p.m. Known quantities. Everything is briefed as a professional pilot. We brief everything, we plan everything, everything is flown procedurally. We don't make up things as we go. We brief what we fly what we brief, and we prepare our missions systematically and intentionally. Nothing should be a surprise. You'll see over here on the image that I have a takeoff card for the Citation 550. This is actually one of my SimCom cards from initial training. And you can see that we've briefed our takeoff weight, our zero fuel weight, our flap settings, our V1, VR, V2, VNER, our VREF, our climb thrust settings. I've even got some like the weather, the METAR written down below. It's taped. It's either taped to the panel or clipped to my yoke before I go flying. I want to make sure that I, I'm flying this airplane based off of known information. A lot of pilots who are taught what to think, instead of going out, finding the right information, applying it to their flight, and using it in meaningful ways, they'll just go, say, oh well, when I was flying, my instructor taught me that I rotate at this speed, or my instructor said I do this, or my instructor said this. And it's based off of just being told what to think instead of how to actually go out, collect this information for yourself based off of your situation, and use it in a meaningful way. Nothing should be a surprise. You should not be getting in the airplane surprised about what's about to happen. And now I put a note here on alternates versus diversions, and I have some notes on my phone I'm going to read to you on this. There's a difference between an alternate and a diversion, and a lot of you guys probably know this, but I'm going to kind of go into it a little bit here. Um, a diversion is something that happens that you were not expecting to happen. But an alternate is something that you um, do as a plan B, C, D, E, F, or G, or something like that. Um, that you're basically expecting, and you're saying, if something goes wrong, then I will do this. It's an if-then statement. If this thing happens, then I will do this. If I cannot get to my destination due to weather, then I will go to this alternate. If when I'm halfway to my destination, I check the weather and notice that there's a squall line between where I am and my destination, then I will land halfway and, regroup and wait for the weather to clear. That's an alternate. A diversion is unplanned. Diversions aren't diversions, however, if they are planned or anticipated. That's the way that I like to think about that. Diversions are stressful. They're unplanned. They take a lot of processing power and mental juice, and they eat up your decision tank. You see, the human brain can only take in so many decisions in a day before the quality of those decisions begins to deteriorate rapidly. I'll talk more about that here in a minute. Alternates, however, these are planned options. It's things that we've looked at, briefed, and looked at beforehand. Multiple scenarios may be considered at different levels, and it takes very little, excuse me, to know extra ADM in flight because of these pre-planned if-then statements. If this happens, then I do this. It takes the thinking way down. So a way that you can make diversions less of a problem is plan more alternates. That's the truth. And I don't mean just alternate airports, I mean alternate routes, alternate courses of action, whatever. But anyway, a quick story about this is one time I almost landed at a closed airport. I was a private pilot, a couple hundred hours. I was flying with me, and I grew up in a large family. I got my license at 17. I'm the oldest of nine. So my parents were real busy. But I was flying with me and three siblings in the family 172. We were flying to a family reunion, and weather was crystal clear VFR day. And me being a dumb pilot that I was at the time, I didn't check NOTAMs or anything. I just looked at ForeFlight, drew a line on the map, and took off and headed to Mississippi. And about halfway there, Memphis Center calls me up and says, "Hey, 701 X-ray, did you check your NOTAMs?" And I was like, you know, dot dot dot. What am I going to say, right? And I didn't. And he was like, "Yeah, the airport you're going to is closed. The runway's been closed for a week, and it's going to be closed for another few days." And I was like, darn, that's stupid. I could have gotten down there and not known that it was closed, maybe not had enough fuel to go somewhere else. A list of things could have happened, right? Fortunately, I asked him and he said the one just next door was open. I could land there. So I did. My family, who was driving down, they came. They were only about 30 minutes away. They came, picked us up, and drove us the rest of the way. But not preparing systematically and not briefing my flight thoroughly, I almost landed a closed airport. Anyway, moving on. You want to know your systems inside and out in your airplane. Here's some pictures of the citation that I fly as a captain of different schematics and things. It's very important that a master pilot know his airplane very thoroughly. And this is really important because of things like memory items. Master pilots, we think and operate in terms of memory items. You got to know these things cold. This is where rote memorization comes in. Know these memory items cold, brief them regularly. These are like emergencies. And I actually have down here, I have a POH and a checklist of some memory items and stuff for the airplane that I'm flying. But excuse me, when stuff hits the fan and lives are on the line, you often don't have time to pull out the checklist. But tasks still have to be done right and done the first time. It's like, for example, memory items for if you have an engine fire in the citation is, throttle infected engine idle. If the light remains on, then lift the cover and push the fire switch. And then, you would push the bottle to put the fire out. That's what you do instantly. You do that from memory. In fact, I think it's actually the one listed here on the document is, yeah, right there. After you do that memory item, then you can pull your checklist out and go through the rest of the items. A story time, I froze up during recurrent training one time after forgetting some important memory items. And that actually shook me a little bit. I was like, goodness, I'm a professional pilot. I've got, several thousand hours of flight time. I'm flying every single day. And when it came down to it, I did not know what I needed to know to fly this airplane safely if this one thing happened. So that changed the way that I look at memory items, and it changed the way that I think about memory items. And now I routinely study these things and try to stay sharp on them because when stuff hits the fan, pilots, I want you guys to write this down, okay? When stuff hits the fan, pilots do not rise to the occasion. They fall back to their last level of training. They do not rise to the occasion. They fall back on their training. So train hard and yeah, I mean, keep that level high because when stuff hits the fan, I mean, you could be up a creek. Next item is that master pilots are spring loaded for the worst. All right. Flying regularly does not mean that you are proficient in critical emergencies. Those are the things that will actually kill you. Now, let's be honest. If you still get behind the airplane during a normal IFR approach, there's no way you're ready for something to really go wrong. You got to make flying boring. If normal flying is boring, then you probably have enough brain cells available to you to make, when stuff hits the fan, to, allow you to deal with that kind of stuff. Train hard and train often until normal flying becomes uninteresting, then keep training. And how this applies to how to think is I'm trying to instill some concepts into your head to help you see from my point of view as a actively flying professional pilot and CFI, what I'm seeing the problem areas be so that you can change your methods. Master pilots, if you want to be master pilot, you need to anticipate more. Remember what I said about alternates versus diversions. Alternates are planned, diversions aren't. But diversions become less of an unplanned surprise when you deal with the unexpected using plan B, C, D, or whatever, something that you already pre-planned. For instance, I would not consider a diversion to have to go to a different airport because of weather. It's just not really a diversion because I should have already planned multiple airports along the route of flight in case something like that happens. Then it becomes an alternate route of flight, an alternate course of action that I was already prepared for in some way. Anticipating these scenarios and being prepared will help your brain work better when you really need it. That way, if something really comes up that you did not prepare for at all, then your mental processing load is able to deal with it. And right here is actually a checklist. You guys probably would want to screenshot this. If you don't screenshot it, you can always send me an email and I will send this to you. It's an IFR checklist, 87 items. of things that you can do to stay ahead of your flight plan, stay ahead of the airplane um, when flying IFR. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 seconds to screenshot this if you want to. Otherwise, you can wait and email me later. All right. Next item. Master pilots front load their decisions on the ground. Now, I said this earlier, the human brain is limited in the number of decisions that it can make in a day. Every decision counts. Stress makes it harder. Doing as much thinking, planning, and decision making as you can on the ground while you can breathe and everything is calm is going to be helpful. Now, when you're in the air, you simply want to execute the plan. You want to do the mission, right? Do all your thinking on the ground and do all your flying in the air. Um, Otherwise, during high workload, you're going to get overwhelmed. So less is more in the airplane. I tell people I want my flying to be boring. I want to do exactly the least amount of button pushes, hand movements, eye movements in the airplane. I want to do as little as possible in the airplane so that I can be present if something does go wrong. Next thing, master pilots train frequently. A friend of mine, Gary Reeves, Master CFI and 2019 FAA CFI of the Year, good friend of mine. He also does instrument mastery training. He's very good. Check him out, pilotsafety.org. He says that a good pilot trains every 24 months, which you're all good pilots, right? 24 months flight review. A great pilot trains every 6 months, which, by the way, is what the airlines do. The airlines require training every 6 months in some way, shape, or form. But a master pilot trains every 30 days. Now, does that mean that you need to go and get a flight review for 30 days? I'm not saying you shouldn't, but that might be a little overkill. I guess 6 months is definitely good. But that's doing stuff like what we're doing right now. We're at a webinar, a seminar, learning things, you know, what's this, every Saturday, right? So 4 times a month you're doing this. Even if you just did one of these a month, you'd be better than 99% of the pilots that are out there. Now, here's a thought. If the airlines are requiring training every 6 months, what makes you think that you're good enough to only need a flight review every 12 or 24? That you seriously, they're flying every single day, sharp as a tack, dealing with all this kind of stuff. Now, maybe they're not having emergencies every day, but they're flying every single day, really, really sharp. Probably the people who would need the least amount of, recurrent training because they're doing it every day. They don't lose it as fast as you do. But even they are training every 6 months. So what makes you think you're good enough to only need a flight review every 24? I think that's absolutely stupid. I recommend an AQP flight review, which is basically an advanced qualification program. You get probably seen it on YouTube. Aviation 101 did it with Dan Greider, AQP flight review. I personally use that with all my students, and it's wonderful. It's basically a list of 20 or so tasks that the NTSB basically says are killing pilots. So we go train on all those things once every 6 or 12 months. And then I recommend also doing an IPC, an instrument proficiency check, every 6 months, whether you need it or not. More details on AQP flight review stuff is on my website, tobyricecfi.com. And also, this image right here is an image of one of the flight simulators that one of my clients just bought. I do a lot of flight simulator training for people. It's a Cirrus SR22 Turbo G6 simulator, and they use these sims just like this to stay sharp at home. So it's very impactful and powerful. This next thing here is a bit of how your brain works as a pilot, okay? So this green area here represents your unconscious area of competence. It's the things that you are competent at doing. All the tasks inside this green bubble represent everything that you can do without having to think. It's your core function. It's your gut zone, I call it, your gut reaction to survive. The yellow area here is what I call your area of cognitive availability. A friend of mine, Master CFI Ed Wishmayer, wrote an article in the NAFI magazine about this, and I loved it so much I created a graphic. Um, but this is your area of conscious competence, the things that you can do inside this zone, which is also called your comfort zone. You can do as long as you're mentally available, mentally present. However, the things that are outside in this red zone is called the area of cognitive unavailability. Your cognition is unavailable. You can't really think when you're outside of here. You start to freeze up. The line between what your comfort zone is and what the airplane can do, that's going to be the area, the danger zone, right? So looking at this next slide here, each of these little circles, little smiley faces, kind of blurry. These are all events that you can handle under normal situations. This is all cognitive available stuff. You can do all these tasks. Oops, the image is not loading. Okay, well, I'll use this next one. So I'm gonna have to describe the previous image. The previous image still had a yellow zone here. But let's imagine this. Poof, something happens, an event occurs outside of your comfort zone. When that happens, your comfort zone shrinks. Your ability to think slows down. Your brain function slows down. Did you know that having a shot of adrenaline is similar biologically to your brain function as being intoxicated? If you are scared, it does some very similar things to your brain as being drunk, which is why when you're scared, it's hard to function sometimes. You kind of slow down, right? So when something happens, it shrinks your comfort zone down to your core, fight or flight survival area. And all these things that you previously could do fine and comfortably, but required thinking and a good working brain to use are no longer available to you. Those normal operations are now unavailable. And your cognitive area of unavailability increases, which is bad. Imagine, you're flying the airplane, you find yourself in an inverted flat spin. Okay, well, that's going to be a problem, right? Because now all the things that you normally could do are gone. You're only stuck with what your gut is actually ready to deal with. Um, the next slide is basically, unless the situation de-escalates, your brain is operating on reactionary survival mode, and you're only left with core function, what you're able to do without thinking, which is your levels of unconscious competence. Without help, it's very difficult to get out of these situations. So how do we fix this, right? You have to train regularly and frequently to expand that comfort zone into more and more and more critical items. You want a higher number of little happy smiley faces inside that circle. You want to stretch that circle to where there's a very thin line of red as opposed to a nice big chunk of red. You don't want that. You want to expand your comfort zone exponentially. Training actively on the things that the NTSB says are killing pilots, like an AQP flight review, will help with that. And also, training on expanding your envelope with E3 exercises is also helpful. I'll put the logo to E3, Expanded Envelope Exercises, E3 by Ed Wishmayer. Details for all of this stuff is on my website. I have a copy of the article that he wrote and put in the NAFI magazine. So these are some of the things that I recommend people do for training is AQP flight review, train on the things that the FAA and NTSB says are killing pilots. And so you can prevent them from happening, and then train on expanding your envelope so that you're more in control when stuff does go down. Again, access to both on TobyRiceCFI.com. Next slide. I could go on for hours with this stuff, but a quick summary is I need you to be planning like your life depends on it because it does. Number two, train until the execution of the plan becomes automatic and boring, and then keep training some more. Number three, front load your decision making on the ground to protect your valuable ADM brain cells for when stuff hits the fan. And number four, if you don't use it, you lose it. That envelope I showed you here before of this yellow area is shrinking. It's always shrinking. If you don't use these skills, you will lose them. So moving on. And yeah, so that's the big thing on how to think is how to think is living your life in a way that allows you to be flexible, not just focusing on what your CFI says. So ask questions, all right? Um, ask questions and learn to plug those answers in a meaningful way to your flight instead of just assuming, oh, well, there's no NOTAMs I can go. Well, maybe there's NOTAMs at your alternates. Maybe there's other things going on. This is a mushy science, you understand? So it's hard to get into. So I'm going to get into a little more practical stuff right now. I'm going to try to be quick with it so that we can get on to the rest of the presentation because it looks like we're going to use every bit of that 50 minutes. So, the moment you've all been waiting for, finally, tactical, practical advice, fun stuff, how to plan like a professional pilot. This is some tips and tricks that I've learned and developed over the past, decade or so of flying. I just said that. Cool. There's two modules in this section we're talking about now. The first is the structure of an IFR flight, and then the next is something that I call the clean flight concept. The second will require a tutorial of how to use ForeFlight. Now, for sake of time, I'm not going to go into super detail on ForeFlight, but I'm going to go enough and kind of quickly to at least show you how I think about approaching just a basic flight plan. Excuse me. All right. Structure of an IFR flight. Pro pilots fly IFR everywhere with very few exceptions. Yes, there are people who fly for a living and they fly VFR. There's very few of them. Most of them fly IFR. Um, I file and fly IFR everywhere, even in visual conditions, and especially at night. Like I simply do not fly at night unless I'm on an IFR flight plan. Unless, of course, I'm with a PPL lesson or a maneuvers lesson or something like that. So this lesson here applies generally to all flying, IFR and VFR, but is technically specific to IFR and simplified for clarity. And here is the structure of an IFR flight, Toby edition, right? Every IFR flight has three flight phases, and this is also every VFR flight too, but let's just go with the IFR. Every IFR flight has three phases. The first phase is takeoff. It starts at the departure runway and goes to your top of climb. Again, this is oversimplified. The FAA does have, in the instrument procedures handbook, some different tactics like departure, takeoff, departure, climb, en route, the terminal, all this other stuff. But this is simplified. You got takeoff from departure to top of climb, top of descent is your en route phase, and then top of descent to the arrival runway is your landing phase. Those are three phases of an IFR flight. You got two rules in each of these phases that you have to comply with. Number one, navigate. You always got to know where you're at and where you're going. Number two, don't hit anything. I mean, how easy is it? VFR, we have our eyeballs, look outside, not hit the tower, not hit the mountain, not hit the other airplane, right? Under IFR, we've got procedures and things like that. And of course, we do have our eyeballs as well for visual departures and visual arrivals. But again, the two rules, navigate, don't hit anything. It's really simple. And there's three tools that you can use to navigate and not hit anything. The first one is visual, which can only be used during takeoff and landing. You can't really use visual en route. You technically could get into the whole VFR on top argument, but who does that? That's don't go VFR on top. That's dumb. But then you got published routes and altitudes, and then you've got air traffic control. More on that now. I'll kind of move that up there to kind of get out of the way. Um, excuse me. So takeoff, your options, right? You have to figure out how can I navigate and not hit stuff during takeoff using these three tools. The three tools are these. You got a visual departure or a VFR departure. Very simple. Can you get from the departure runway to above your minimum IFR altitude where you're on an airway or a procedure or maybe the off-route obstacle clearance altitude, the OROCA, the big grid boxes on your low IFR chart with your minimum altitudes. Can you get from the departure runway to a minimum IFR altitude where you will then get legal coverage in the en route structure for terrain? Can you do it visually, right? And yes or no, easy, right? I mean, if your ceilings are high enough, maybe you can. If they're not, maybe you can't, right? So ask yourself that question. Maybe you can't do it. Maybe you don't want to do it. And then you have to look for other options to get yourself from the runway to your cruise safely. Second one is diverse departure. Diverse departure exists at every single airport in the FAA that has been surveyed for an instrument approach. And basically, a diverse departure is that unless otherwise published, um, it's based on you hitting the departure end of the runway at 35 feet above the ground and flying runway heading at a climb rate of 200 feet per nautical mile until you reach your minimum IFR altitude. But you're not allowed to turn from runway heading until you reach 400 AGL. So if you can meet those requirements after 400 AGL, then turning on course and continuing to climb at 200 feet per nautical mile, then you are guaranteed, unless otherwise published, to not hit anything, basically, within 25 or I think it's 46 miles of your departure into the runway, depending on if it's a mountainous terrain you're in or non-mountainous terrain. You guys can read this in Chapter 1, Departure Procedures of the Instrument Procedures Handbook. Where there is no diverse departure, or where the diverse departure requirements cannot be met because there's obstacles in the departure path, you're going to have a different procedure. You might have an ODP, obstacle departure procedure, textual or visual. That could get you from the runway up to a minimum IFR altitude where you're safe. You also got a standard instrument departure, SID, and you also got ATC vectors. ATC has a minimum vectoring altitude where they can say, hey, this is the lowest area of altitude you can be at in this area, and you won't hit anything. Last week, Keith Smith came on from Pilot Edge and did like a flight in the flight simulator. I actually used to work for Keith Smith. I was a Pilot Edge air traffic controller for 3 years, and I love Pilot Edge. Highly recommend them. All of my sims have Pilot Edge. So if you guys do have a home flight simulator and you're not using Pilot Edge, you're missing out. So I'm pretty experienced with the ATC side of things too. So it's always good to have that in the sim. But that's takeoff, okay? So you got to have basically, can you make these things happen to get from here to here? The next one is en route. And en route, there is no visual option, okay? You have to be on something published. And that published could be a published route that contains an MEA or a MOCA or, some kind of published altitude or a non-published route, but now you're using the off-route obstacle clearance altitude. That gives you 1,000 or 2,000 feet above, the maximum elevation figure um, for that area. And then you've also got ATC vectors with an MVA for your minimum altitude. The government is responsible for you not hitting anything at this point. So you have to ask yourself from top of climb, top of descent, can I make any of these happen? And my recommendation is always base it off of ATC not being there because if you have lost communications, well, you got to take care of that. Moving on to the next one is top of descent to around runway landing. You've got these options. You can do a visual approach from your minimum IFR altitude. So if ATC gets you down to the point where you're at your minimum altitude and you can see the airport, then you can get a visual approach and you can land. Otherwise, you might use a STAR, standard terminal arrival, to transition from the en route phase to the landing phase or via an instrument approach procedure, an IAP, right? An ILS, an RNAV, a VOR, whatever. Of course, those come with published altitudes and routes or ATC vectors again. You can use ATC vectors to get a mix of any of these things. But this is just the basic structure of an IFR flight. This is how I, as a professional pilot, I view what am I about to go look for. These are the questions I need to be asking myself in each phase. Can I navigate and not hit stuff in each one of these phases? And these are my options for making it happen. Can I do that? If not, then maybe I can't fly, or maybe I need to find something else that does work. I just said that right there. And then what requirements do I have to meet to make this happen? Like climb requirements. If I'm flying at a high density altitude in a low performing airplane that can't climb very steeply, well, I might not be able to clear that hill or that mountain. I got to be able to make sure, can I actually meet these requirements? Am I able to make it happen? A great book. Highly recommend this. Screenshot time, everybody. Screenshot time. Highly recommend this book, IFR Procedures, a pilot-friendly manual from Pilot Workshops. It is very, very, very helpful. Probably, honestly, I mean, this is my unpopular opinion. I think it should be FAA required, but that's just me. I've got it right here. It's got my screen's being kind of funny, but basically, it's got tons and tons and tons and tons of very simple, logical explanations for basically every IFR procedure you could possibly fly. It dumbs it down to where even a guy like me can understand it. So excuse me, highly recommend that you get this book from Pilot Workshops to help you understand each of these procedures so you can use them to the maximum ability. And then I forgot why I put this on here, but this is just, the 5 Ps for ADM, each phase of flight, where you start making decisions. I'm going to give you guys a few moments to screenshot this if you'd like. Otherwise, you can just Google it. The ADM and 5P review, it shows, things you're looking for basically at different points of your flight. All right, that was the IFR structure. Next here is the clean flight concept. This is how to, again, part of how to plan. This is where everyone needs to get out for flight. So if you have for flight, go ahead and open it up if you want to follow along with me. Otherwise, you can just do this, just watch my screen. I invented this concept called clean flight concept. And basically what it is, it's a way to use for flight in a clean way. It's not cluttered. and you can basically find the information that you need to get the job done for your flight planning. And I don't have very much time to do it, so I'm going to be pretty quick about it, and I might have to do the abridged version. And of course, if you need more help with this, you can always contact me via my phone number or email, and I'll be glad to help you with that, off of the webinar. We're going to be building a basic flight plan today between Kilo Charlie Bravo Echo and Kilo Juliet Alpha Uniform for today. And the departure time is going to be 12 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to fly a Cirrus SR-22 Turbo. And we're going to ask ourselves three questions on this flight plan. I kind of a joke. I call it cumulogranite, cumulonimbus, and cumulo-inconvenience. And basically, that's my dad joke way of saying, let's ask about terrain, cumulogranite. You don't want to fly into a cumulogranite cloud, right? You're gonna hit a rock. So let's ask about terrain. Then let's ask about the weather, and then let's ask about the airspace. I call it inconvenience because sometimes those little magenta circles or blue circles on the sectional chart can be a real pain in the butt because you want to go somewhere, but now you can't because you got to go around the Charlie airspace or around the Bravo or above it. It's an inconvenience. So we're going to ask ourselves those three questions in a meaningful way using ForeFlight. So I'm going to change my screen share briefly and see if I can get ForeFlight to come up. Just give me a moment. I'm going to have to close out this app and open this up. Stand by one. I'm pausing the screen share. Loading up. Oh, I got to restart that program. Give me one moment. So sorry. Go here, here, and stand by. Here we are. Okay, very good. I'm going to resume the screen share. All right, very good. Laura, can you see that?
Yep, looks good, Toby.
Okay, very good. All right, so follow along with me. I'm going to show you some basic ways of using the methods I just showed you in the IFR flight structure here on ForeFlight. So the first thing that I do in any flight plan is I just plug the two airports in. So I'm going to do that now, KCBE to KJAU. This is where we're flying, all right? And we're flying in a Cirrus. Now, the first thing I'm going to be thinking about is, okay, well, sorry, I'm going to the 4,000. First thing I'm thinking about here is, of course, making sure my time of day is set up, make sure I pack my flight. I hit the pack button and load it all up. I already did that earlier today. I want to see terrain-wise, what am I dealing with, right? So I'm going to go to ForeFlight up here to the layers. I'm going to hit Hazard Advisor. And by the way, I'm using the highest version of ForeFlight, the performance or whatever they call it. This here shows the terrain. I can use it to get an idea of what altitude might be safe to make this flight at. So I'm going to go up down here, and it just looks like if I was at 4,000 feet, I'd be pretty close to some of this terrain. So that's going to be too low. Maybe I could pick 6,000 feet because I'm going west. And it looks like 6,000 feet, I'm well above the terrain. I can go over here to my profile view, and I can see at 4,000 I got a problem, but I can move it up and down, and you can see the terrain disappears. I can see what's going to be safe altitude. If I go to 6,000 right there, perfect. You can see that you can see right, my pencil go. You can see right here, it says highest point, 3988. So basically 4,000. So over these mountainous areas, I'm at least 2,000 feet above them. So I feel good about that. So again, this is very basic. I'm not going into a super exhaustive explanation here because we don't have all that much time left. Excuse me. All right. So I picked my altitude 6,000. We're going to just go with that for now. Let's set this up right here. Oh, hold on. Sometimes ForeFlight can be a little bit particular. There we go. All right. So terrain looks fine. Now let's look at the weather. All right. I'm going to go over here to my AirMets and SIGMETs and center weather advisories. And I see a bunch of pretty colors. Pretty colors tells me, hey, I need to keep investigating. Right? Terrain's not really a problem for me, but weather is a problem for me now. So we investigate. Time of departure is going to be at 12 Central, or sorry, 12 uh, Eastern, right? So that's going to be about, looks like about now on that time of day. I'm going to get rid of all these layers. Let's look at icing first. Okay, I'm showing some icing air mets, so I'm going to tap on those. I got some freeze levels. The tops are at 9,000 of my icing, and it's active, so I might have some icing to deal with. I am flying a Cirrus that has, anti-icing abilities, so that makes me feel pretty good. Looking over here, this one, that one's also active. Tops are at 14,000, so a bit higher. So I might have to do some zigzagging around some of these clouds. But again, I do have an airplane that has anti-icing available. I might continue to look and see how bad is the icing. What is the severity of the icing? And I would look at that more, but I'm not going to right now because of time. Turbulence high doesn't apply to me. Turbulence low does. Looks like I might have some bumps on the flight. Looking at the altitudes for that, between 10 and 18,000, I might have something. And then over here, between a surface and 8, I might have something as well. It might be bumpy. That might make a factor into, whether or not you go. If your passengers get sick easily, maybe you don't go. The next is IFR. Again, moving my slider here to the time zone that's applicable to me. It looks like the weather does get better throughout the day. So that is good. I am seeing some mountain obscuration right there. And then pretty much goes away. So I'm not really going to look at any more of that. Thunderstorms, there's pretty much nothing going on. You can see my hazard advisor shows the terrain across the country, which is really, really cool. I'm going to get rid of hazard advisor. I'm going to go over my radar. Let's see what's going on up here. So it looks like if I get rid of radar and there we go. Looks like there is some snowfall and some icing going on up there, but it's pretty much moving out of the way. And if we go over here and we look at the imagery for today, look at the prog charts, surface analysis for our time of departure, which should be right in around here. You can see there's two cold fronts moving in, and so we're getting some cold weather, but it looks like this high pressure area over time is eventually going to get sucked in towards the area where we're going. High pressure, typically good weather, good visibility. That makes me happy. And I don't see any convective activity in there. I don't see any T-storms, which you could see by the red hatches. So I'm going to kind of go along with that. Precipitation looks like there is some rain buildup over time, but most of it's going to be to the southeast of me. Significant weather, that looks fine. Convective outlooks, all that's pretty clear. Going on from there. Clouds, this is going to be important for me. So it looks like through my flight, the clouds are kind of getting thicker to the west and breaking up to the east. This means to me that I'm probably going to need to be going to the east of my flight if I have a problem where maybe I'm stuck in the clouds, I'm stuck in some icing or something like that. I can't get out. Maybe when my TKS fluid's empty, I need to get to visual conditions. I would go over this direction and probably go to the east. Now, again, I'm going through this pretty quickly, guys, so don't expect to have a completely thoroughly brief flight all just right here. Um, that looks good there. The next thing is looking at my departure weather. Now, right now, it's pretty much VFR out there. I could just take off VFR, but let's say I couldn't take off VFR. Let's say I couldn't because the weather was lower. How do I know that I can get out of this airport? Well, let's go to procedures, departure, takeoff minimums, and looking at my Greater Cumberland Regional Airport information. I got takeoff minimums right here, which is not required to be the visibility and ceiling is not legally required for us to follow under Part 91, just doing the kind of flying we're doing today. If I was an air carrier or commercial operator, I would have to meet that requirement. But I do have to meet the requirement of my climb gradient right here, 310 feet per nautical mile, 3,200, if I'm going to be flying these departure procedures. Because the departure procedure is only really going to protect me if I climb as steep as it says I need to climb. So my recommendation is always fly the steeper of the two climb gradients that are listed, if there is more than one. In this case, my procedure, let's say I'm taking off runway 23, I have to climb heading 214 to 3,400 feet before turning on course, and I have to do that at a rate of, says right here, I can do standard with 925 nautical mile to 1900, or I can do this one. Again, that's if you're flying a commercial operator, you got to meet the requirements, right? But in this case, the requirements for visibility and ceiling, but in this case, you don't. But you do need to maintain one of these. So I would say, can you do this? Now, you may, in your decision making, realize the weather's good enough, whatever, you could go to 480. But again, by default, be conservative. So I know that's my procedure. I'm going to climb the 3,400 on that heading before going on course. Cool. After that, what is on course? Well, let's look at the weather at the destination. JAU, there is no observation there. The nearby TAF is Tyson is McGee Tyson Airport in Knoxville. It's pretty much showing VFR on the MOS on the TAF. The daily weather, I love this feature in ForeFlight. It's not perfect, but it's really helpful. I can kind of get an idea of what's going on. It's pretty clear. So, I mean, I've got pretty much a VFR day going into where I'm going. But again, let's say it's IMC. If it's IMC, I got to fly an approach, right? So I'm going to go to flight plan, edit, procedure. We're going to go to approach. Again, 2-3 is what we're going to use. And we're just going to go straight into Egsoy. And there's no procedure turn required there. It says no PT from coming in from that area. So I can ignore that little racetrack it's giving me. Category B is my approach category. I've got LP minimums. Select all those, hit add to route. And then I've got it all on there. So here's my flight plan, shows my chart. I would brief the plate, do all that. I'm going to close the plate and hide that. Cool. So now I want to go back and look and make sure with this new route, 6,000 is still going to be good for me. Looks good. However, I have not yet looked at my icing. So I'm going to tap on icing. Looks like 6,000 is going to put me right in the middle of that layer. I don't like that. I want to verify and see is that just is it likely that's going to happen or not? And by doing that, I'm going to go to clouds. It looks like I'm going to be in the clouds at 6,000 based on my time of departure. So clouds plus an icing layer tells me I'm probably going to get some. I would go look at PIREPs and stuff too. In this case, let's come on up to 12,000 feet. I will not need oxygen at 12,000 feet. That puts me above all that. Icing. The taps, come on here. There you go. Icing's all below that. I can use my TKS fluid to get out of that layer. And then above it, I'm fine. And then I can use a little bit to get through to my destination. So damn, that looks pretty good too. Looking at turbulence, get rid of this and this. Looks like I might have some bumps on the initial climb out and level off, but as I go on to the flight, it should get better. Airspace wise, what am I dealing with? It looks like I'm pretty clean on airspace. I do have an MOA right through here. If it's hot, air traffic control will let me know, and they'll probably give me a descent to maybe 10,000 or maybe a turn or something. I'm allowed to fly through an MOA as an IFR pilot, so I'm not ultimately concerned about that too much. But if ATC says, hey, you got to change something, yeah, I'll change it. One of the things that I have not mentioned that I'll mention very briefly is picking alternates. I always pick 3 alternates. This is actually a trick I learned from my friend Gary Reeves, also Master CFI, FAA 2019 CFI of the Year, pilotsafety.org. Great guy. Um, he says pick 3 alternates. The first alternate is your departure alternate. If you can't get back into your destination airport, where would you go, right? So, you'd pull up your aeronautical view here and you'd find the airport, maybe go Clarksburg, whatever, figure out where you would go based off the weather conditions. And then the next one is called a weather alternate, typically about halfway. The idea is that if halfway you realize that there is a weather that's going to make it hard for you to land where you're going, you should change. You should, land and wait the weather out. Maybe Charleston could be a good one. However, I do know that the weather over at Charleston was showing worse, you see here, than it was over here to the east. Maybe over here, see, at Roanoke, it's a little bit better. So maybe you'd go to Roanoke if you had a problem as opposed to Charleston. Again, this is just preliminary looking. And then destination alternate, this is going to be if something happens, you get there and ultimately you just can't land, then go somewhere else. If it's due to weather, you want to pick somewhere that's at least 50 miles away. 50 miles away, the weather's probably not going to be as bad as it was at the destination. Or if it's just something dumb like, an airplane crash lands on the runway and you got to go somewhere else, but it's not a weather problem, then maybe pick a closer one. If I was going to Jacksboro, I might go land at, McGee Tyson in Knoxville. But if I had a weather problem, I might go back to, Kingsport to Tri-Cities Regional, Bristol, that area, right? So far we've looked at weather semi-thoroughly, and we've looked at terrain. The next thing is airspace. And like I said before, I mean, it's pretty clean. I don't really see much of an issue along this route of flight. We go and we check NOTAMs, check all those things. Always call the weather briefer too. They're going to give you information that you may not have thought of before. I always go to my send to flight button. Of course, we'll pack all this stuff too, make sure all your documents are loaded, make sure alternates are prepared, and then you can go to briefing, get an idea of what your fuel situation is going to be like, get an idea of your weight and balance. You can plug all that stuff in there. I always look at this to see, quick look again, did I miss anything, right? Just go through, check my my air mats, sigmats, icing stuff, turbulence high, low, synopsis. Again, just looking through everything. Looks like as along my route of flight right now, they're reporting IFR. So, I might have to be doing some more detailed looking into some of these alternates along the way. PIREP wise, it does show some PIREPs along the area. I'd be checking for ice, see how bad it is, what altitudes they're at. Cloud coverage, looked at that already. Surface, winds and visibility and precipitation. I always say, if you see pretty colors, that means investigate. Pretty colors means investigate. If it's just white, then it's fine. Um, Looking at TAFs, I love how ForeFlight has the blue lines to show you what time you'd be over that area. And yeah, so I mean it's all pretty good. I don't see any issues with that. Wind chart, that's good. Vertical cross section, this is one of my favorites right here. This is going to help you with your icing. It shows what levels of icing we're probably going to get and the temperatures as we climb, as we cruise, and as we come down. Looks like 12,000 was a good idea. It keeps us above pretty much everything. But we will need some of that TKS fluid for takeoff and landing. Anyway, go through the rest of this. Departure NOTAMs, read the NOTAMs, destination NOTAMs, navigation NOTAMs, you go through all that stuff. And then I always call the briefer afterwards if I'm going on a really intense flight. So, um, and then of course, when I'm done with all this, I'd go over my sectional again, make sure I didn't miss anything. I might go over to my IFR low. I want to make sure is 12,000 good for my off-route obstacle clearance altitudes. And it is, it's 8,000, 6,000, 7,000. You can see these numbers here, right? So, I mean, I'm definitely going to be above those. I could legally be below those in certain instances. I won't get into the details of that right now because that would warrant a much longer discussion on what is legally required when you're flying IFR. But that's basically the gist of how I do this kind of stuff. I just look at it from a very practical standpoint. What's my terrain situation? Does it affect, do I need to change my routing because of it or altitudes? What's my weather situation? Do I need to change my routing or weather because of it? And then what's my airspace situation? Again, do I need to change what I'm doing because of it? So those are some of the thoughts that you're looking for there. I'm going to wrap that section of the presentation up here so that we can get on to the rest of this and finish up and have time for questions. I didn't mean for this quite to take so long, but hope that's been beneficial just to see a little bit into how I think about for-flight planning. I'm going to close this and go back to here, and we're here. Very good. Quick recap: terrain, weather, airspace, NOTAMs. Look for those. Every flight is a go until you have enough reasons to say no. Pencil in several alternates. That's airports and routes. Sometimes stopping halfway is better than waiting at your departure airport. Pick at least three alternates. Talked about that already. Call the briefer and then build it all out so the flight is boring and expected. That's that. Now, now that we have a solid flight plan, let's make this happen. How do we execute this? All right. If you did the planning right, this is the easy part. Recent and intense training, proficiency in the airplane, avionics, buttonology, flight, IFR, cockpit organization, a clear mind, a full stomach, a rested body are critical to the successful outcome of a mission. Training is key, but you have to keep it up and stay sharp on all the areas of flying, not just the everyday ones. So here's a question for you. I want you guys to think about this for a moment. Have you ever been on a flight where you feel like you were in a flow state, like everything was just going smoothly? And then have you ever been on a flight where you felt like everything was forced? What were the differences between those two flights? Or why did one feel stress and the other not? Yeah, it could be a planning problem, but that's not all. One of the biggest mistakes that I see good pilots make is rushing, prioritizing agility over stability, and trying to beat the clock. And by agility versus stability, what I try to mean there is um, they think that if they just have good stick and rudder skills, they'll be able to get out of a situation to put themselves in. And that's just dumb. You want to not put yourself in a situation in the first place. And trying to rush and beat the clock is not helpful. And that's honestly partly due to flight training. People in flight training trying to save a buck on the Hobbs meter by rushing their flight, that carries over to your flying. So slow yourself down. Be calm. Never hop into a plane with the mindset of get there-itis. Never hop in the plane thinking that you're going to figure stuff out along the way. Flawless execution requires knowing exactly what buttons to push and when. knowing exactly what pitch, power, and configuration your airplane needs to perform the task you want it to do. There's a document there you can fill out. Having your V speeds sticky noted to your panel, ready, briefed. And briefing takeoffs and approaches, becoming familiar with your airplane's flight profiles. Like at each point, what do you do? And everyone's done these in pilot training where you had to write down the pattern on a piece of paper and tell the speeds and the RPM settings and the flap settings and altitudes. My CFI made me do that. I make my students do it. And of course, being spring loaded for emergencies, briefing those things too. I'm just getting started on that, but outside of the training I mentioned earlier in this presentation, you can work on your execution skills at home by using a flight simulator. You'd be surprised how realistic and attuned they are these days. This simulator here is about a $35,000 simulator. So this is a really nice one. I've worked with sims that are down to a couple $1,000s easily, but the good ones are around 8 to 10 is what I found to get a really good sim. Even without a simulator, just being intentional, calm, focused, and precise in your everyday flying will help you master buttonology, tune up your airmanship, and help you make every flight better than the last. Just remember that bad habits are hard to break. So train regularly and intentionally with a master instructor who will hold you accountable. We're almost done. We're almost done. How to overcome. Overcoming relates to anything unplanned that occurs that you need to deal with in some way. There are three levels of urgency when it comes to overcoming like an emergency or something like that. Number one is land as soon as convenient. Ask yourself the question, does this mean I need to land now as possible or as convenient? Convenient might be continue to your destination if there's no other good reason to not do that. Whatever's convenient, you can land. Sometimes that means continuing on. Second would be land as soon as possible. This is going to be like your nearest airport. This might be, you've got like an oil pressure light come on and there's an airport nearby you can land. Or maybe, your engine's running a little bit rough, or maybe you've got, a low fuel warning or something like that. Land as soon as possible, but definitely don't continue your destination. And the last one is land right now. This could be the engine's on fire, right? We got to get down right now. So just ask yourself, is this something that needs to be on the ground right now, or can I deal with this maybe at a slower pace? Not every unexpected event requires you to freak out. In fact, none of them do. Um, I know it's the crash that happened in the citation recently with Greg Biffle. I know that that's a really sad one with the NASCAR driver. One of the things interesting about the citation is that the takeoff procedure for engine failure on takeoff is literally just take off and fly a straight line. Take off, fly straight out, and clean the airplane up and run your checklist. And I'm not exactly sure what that pilot did, but I do remember hearing a report saying that he turned back around to the airport. And I'm not saying he did the wrong thing, but I am saying that most of the time, the right answer when it comes to having emergency in an airplane is just fly a straight line and keep flying the plane. Don't try to force it to do anything. Just let it fly, especially in a multi-engine jet. Thoroughly briefing critical emergencies before takeoff is life-saving. And if you're not surprised and can react immediately, it's hardly an emergency. Here's an image of an emergency briefing that I created. Like I said, 99% of the time during an in-flight emergency, the answer is just to fly a straight line, keep the wings level, maintain control, and run your checklist when you can. In the citation, engine failure after V1 means reaching VR, rotate to 8 degrees, pitch for V2, positive rate, gear up, 400 feet, flaps up. After V2 plus 10, accelerate to VNR and run your checklist. That's what you do in the citation. And it's hardly an emergency. You just fly the plane. Um, and like I said, an engine failure in this airplane is hardly an emergency, but a lot of pilots get themselves killed because they overreact, rush things, not follow procedure, and try to Superman the airplane instead of climbing straight out and dealing with the problem in the air like Cessna wants you to. Not every situation to overcome is a critical emergency. Oftentimes, it's unexpected weather, sick passenger, bathroom break, or maybe you need to divert to another airport because you forgot to check your NOTAMs at your destination. And don't ask me how I know that, right? During those times when you need to make decisions, just remember, fly the plane, point it in the general direction of where you need to go, use ATC to help you get the weather and NOTAMs if needed, and calmly check those three things like terrain, weather, airports, and airspace. Just slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Having a clear mind from a good pre-flight briefing helps. If you brief several alternates, you can make an unplanned diversion seem like plan B instead of plan Z. At the end of the day, fly the plane, be calm, do your memory items, then run your checklist. Practicing these scenarios with an instructor every 6 months will be life-changing. Pro tip, if you have to divert, I do suggest going to a place you've already planned as an alternate. It takes less mental load, and you're going to be more mentally present. We are almost finished. Last thing is how to train. How to train like a pro pilot. We've already discussed some of the training earlier, but here's a recap. A good pilot trains every 24 months. A great pilot trains every 6 months. A master pilot trains every 30 days. And that 30 days, could be wings credits, books, articles, etc. I recommend an AQP flight review and an IPC on rotation every 6 months at a minimum. Ideally, maybe do a training event once per quarter so that every 6 months you get one of those. AQP will train you on all the things the NTSB says are killing pilots. Prevention is no accident. And E3, we talked about that earlier, expanded envelope exercises will expand your envelope to be mentally available when stuff hits the fan. I recommend an IPC every 6 months, whether you need it or not. And even if you don't need an IPC, you can still get on a simulator and have your instructor give you some challenges without ever leaving your house. And if you have an FAA approved sim, you might be able to log it. Regardless, get in your sim, practice buttonology, procedures, ATC with Pilot Edge, ForeFlight, and so much more. If you want to get a good home simulator, just let me know. Contact information is coming up. There's so much more we can discuss, guys. I hope this has been insightful to everyone and that you're left with some helpful tactics and maybe some good ideas to improve your aviation experience. Here's some basic information on how to work with me. I do IFR mastery training for people who are already rated IFR, and I also give the same exact training to people who are not rated, and I give them an instrument rating at the end of it. I do it via multi-day, coast-to-coast, cross-country trips, IFR in your airplane with real weather, complex airspace, terrain, and adventure. Usually, I'll bring my wife, you bring your wife or spouse, and we have like a double date out of the deal. And we go fly for 2 weeks and get all this experience. 40 hours of actual flying experience, chasing the weather, and then I also do advanced proficiency stuff like AQP E3, Mentor Pilot, and Citation 500 series, and also do transition training in several aircraft like the Sling TSI, Saratogas, Bristows, so on. But there's my contact information there. And then I'm also on TikTok. I know a lot of you guys use TikTok to scroll through training